Well, hello. My name is Chavela. I am an architect and an interior designer with a background in anthropology, of all things. And I've worn a lot of different hats and worked in other countries during my career. And it all started in graduate school. In graduate school at the University of Texas, I was lucky enough to have a summer job as an illustrator and surveyor on a dig in Italy. After I graduated from UT Austin with my architecture degree, I moved to Mexico City with my husband, who is Mexican, and who is also an architect, where we lived and worked for about 10 years. We returned to Texas in 2001 and went to work together for Alamo Architects. And I worked there until I left to teach interior design at UTSA with Susan Lanford and Dr. Ella Takaya Persani. Thanks to the Mammon Family Library and Bethany, thank you. I'm happy to have this opportunity to be able to share some of the things that I've learned over my career about interior design and the design process. Winston Churchill once said, "We shape our buildings. Thereafter, they shape us." It was a wry observation on the human condition, meaning that we are as changed by the buildings we construct as we change the world by constructing the buildings. It is an important part of the human experience to want to alter and improve our living conditions and to manipulate our environment in different ways for our own purposes. We've been doing it for thousands of years, and this particular impetus has shaped us into the kind of beings we are today. An understanding of our environment is built from an awareness of our place in the world, learned from our life experiences, and the human desire to know about our precedences and culture, including such things as art, architecture, psychology, and history. That curiosity may be a blessing. It certainly is human nature. Interior design is the combining of the artistic and the practical, finding an elegant and efficient way to shape the environment of an interior space, just as we change the exterior environment in order to meet a particular set of human needs. So, what defines an interior? It seems obvious. It's the place you are when you're inside of a building. For a modern person, this is the simplest way to describe this space. For someone living before buildings were invented, however, it might have been the overhang of a large tree, a canyon crevasse, or a natural cave. One thing they all have in common with a room in a suburban house, here we see one, the front seat of a car, or the grand space of the Pantheon in Rome, is that they all give you a sense of being inside, of enclosure. That can be as comfortable as a bedroom or as intimidating and grand as a cathedral. The same space can have different sensations. A 12 by 15 jail cell can feel grim and confining, but the same size and shape of room made with different materials can feel open, warm, and comforting. The sense of being enclosed, of being inside as opposed to being outside in the open environment, that remains the same. Just as other kinds of animals, the human creature from our earliest ancestors has sought out interior spaces for safety, comfort, and even for more esoteric, strictly human activities like worship and ritual. Nearly 40,000 years ago, the earliest of humans, sorry, I'm losing my space here. The earliest of humans were altering the interiors of their caves for their own purposes, most of which modern archaeologists can only guess about. This is from the Lascaux Caves, and it is sort of an idealization of painting. The caves the caves in Lascaux in southern France, which are shown here, are examples of the human desire to seek shelter. They are also a spectacular example of another human impulse, the desire to alter and decorate, to change our interior environment in elaborate and symbolic ways, perhaps to leave a mark that signifies our presence in a temporary existence. Around 10,000 years ago, during a time in which people changed from living nomadic lives of constant movement and temporary found shelters to more settled farming lives, the idea of changing our environment grew to include constructing our own places, our own exteriors out of thatch, wood, clay, dirt, stone. Here's some stone construction, so that we could conveniently have our own constructed interiors in which to retreat. And right along with creating these constructed interior spaces came the desire to elaborate them in various ways. I call it Neolithic interior design. And it's an impulse that is carried down through time and evolution. And it's pretty much shared by all humans who have ever lived in every part of the planet. Even though the human response to interiors is a universal global experience, it's also individual, personal, and intimate. It is not only where you are when you're inside of a room, but it's also something, conversely, that's inside of you. By that, I mean that it's your understanding and relationship to any room you occupy that is informed by your internal perception of that space. Perception is how you understand what you are experiencing, and is made up of your values, your culture, your awareness of the world around you, and your own interests and sensations. Part of your awareness starts with the feeling of being outside compared to the feeling of being inside. And through that transition, you become part of the inside of that space, just as the furniture, the walls, and the color are all parts that make up the whole of that interior space. Once inside, we become the contents of that space. And that is deliberate, because as the occupant of that space, you're the most important thing in that space. This is where interior design comes into play, because a thoughtfully designed interior can affect us emotionally, influencing mood and attitude, among other things. It can provide us a sense of status, reinforce our worldview, and strengthen our sense of self, as well as give us clues about where we are in time and place. Obviously, a contemporary bedroom is different from a royal bedroom in Versailles, and it may serve as a place to sleep, which this room does, but it differs very dramatically in many ways from the bedroom of Louis XIV, visually, structurally, and ritually. An interior engages our senses. The configuration of that room can determine what you see, smell, hear, touch, and sometimes even taste. Recent studies suggest that the sensation of enclosure provided by a room can also give us information about where our head and body are in space. That's called vestibular sense, the sense of movement and balance. Another essential part of our perception and awareness of space is absorbed from the culture in which we were raised. A culture, roughly defined, is the common identity of a group of people reflecting such things as their shared history, environment, family ties, economies, and/or spiritual beliefs. The Peruvian culture, which I have photographs here of Machu Picchu, is a very tight culture that is informed by having lived in these gigantic mountains. People living in warmer climates like Mexico or Spain, of which I'm a little more familiar, build living spaces that can often have open air interior patios and year-round gardens surrounded by large rooms with high ceilings and windows that take advantage of the cool air patterns. And here, people have a different relationship to interiors than people from mountainous, colder countries. Those places are where buildings are enclosed rather than open, offering protection from freezing temperatures over long winter months instead of breezes to cool down the interiors of buildings in hot climates. Cultural influences often guide everything from preferences in the use of space to choice of materials for their buildings, stucco over wood, wood over stone, aesthetic taste in color choices, seating arrangements, or room size, which affect how we relate to the interior of any given room. A successful interior designer must have an intrinsic awareness and understanding of both the world in general and of their own culture. Just as there's a part of the global human experience to manipulate the environment for practical reasons like providing for food, protection, and shelter, every society has an impetus to make their surroundings beautiful as well. Color choices as an expression of cultural preference. In this photograph, the Mexican painter Frida Kahlo painted the exterior of her house this brilliant Mexican blue, and that's become absolutely emblematic of Mexican color choices. It's a universal artistic drive that crosses the boundaries of time and culture. Just as there's part of the global human experience to manipulate the environment for practical reasons like providing for food, protection, and shelter, every society has an impetus to make their surroundings beautiful as well as useful. And although there are a variety of interpretations of beauty and the way it's expressed, there is also a general consensus that the elements of art and design can be thought of as the universal language of artistic expression that crosses the boundaries of time and culture. This is a contemporary Chinese interior and an ancient Chinese painting. Here's a painting. Actually, these are drawings from Leonardo da Vinci. He was famous not only for his paintings, but also for his explorations in architectural space. And this is the Vitruvian Man This is the Vitruvian Man who it's his attempt to determine the perfect proportions of the human body. Of course, this is from one of his sketchbooks of a potential flying device of which he was very interested. For instance, we tend to think of painting, architecture, and graphic design and sculpture or interior design as separate types of artistic expression. But throughout the ages and in all different cultures and generations of people, individual artists, architects, and designers have moved fluidly between the professions, actively practicing all methods of artistic expression. This can be seen in the work of painters such as Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, or Giovanni Bernini, who were equally famous for their magnificent buildings, their sculptures, interiors, as well as their paintings. Giovanni Bernini, Lorenzo Bernini, was an Italian artist and sculptor and architect. While a major figure in the world of architecture, he was more prominently the leading sculptor of his age. His interest in architecture extended to such things as designing the baldacchino, which is shown here in the Vatican. And this is the piazza and colonnade that's in front of St. Peter's in Vatican City. Pretty impressive. Michelangelo, of course, everyone remembers Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel. He painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel and created one of the most iconic images of the Christian faith. This is the creation of Adam, which is a fresco, part of a fresco. And his artistic brilliance extended well beyond the painting to his design for the interior of this magnificent design for the interior of Santa Maria degli Angeli in Rome. Here, it's really interesting because this is trompe-l'oeil, which means that it's false perspective, painted on a flat surface. The painting here becomes the interior design, and the interior design becomes the painting. This is done by Andrea Pozzo, also known for his spectacular interiors for other Italian cathedrals and churches. Stage design. It's another artistic crossover into interior design. In 1932, the surrealist painter Jean Miro collaborated with Sergei Diaghilev, who was founder of the Russian ballet in Paris, to design the sets and costumes for a spectacular stage production of Jeux d'Enfants. Jean Miro's fascination with interiors was often shown in his many lush paintings of interior rooms that have inspired designers and painters for generations. Augustus Sherrill Whitten, founder of the New York School of Interior Design, one of the most prestigious design schools at the turn of the century, compared interior design to learning a foreign language, stating that in order for the designer to express themselves, they must master the vocabulary and grammar of design. As he described it, the vocabulary consists of style, material, form, detail, color, light, and pattern. These are illustrated over here. And held together by the grammar of design, of balance, rhythm, scale, emphasis, proportion, unity, variety, and harmony. It's kind of a mouthful. Mr. Sherrill wrote, like master writers who manipulate language in new ways, talented designers will break conventions and rules to create new trends. If they have the skills behind them and this vocabulary of design, there's nothing stopping them. There has always been an intimate relationship between architecture and interior design. Up until the 20th century, it was assumed that the decoration of interiors was an integral part of architecture, and it was always handled by the architect or constructor as a secondary task in the building project. This is a really magnificent space, and I just had to show it. It's the dining hall of the Balliol College at Oxford University in England. But toward the end of the 19th century, interest in decorating interiors grew in popularity, but it still wasn't considered a serious profession until much later. Interior decoration grew in popular interest, but it was considered part of the architecture, still considered part of the architecture of a building. And the look and furnishings reflected the aesthetic of an earlier time. This interior was designed by John Dibley Grace, who was president of the newly founded Institute of British Decorators in 1899. However, with the dawn of the 20th century, as buildings became more complex and wealthy Americans demanded more elaborate homes and offices, architecture and the decorative arts merged and became a new profession called interior design. Along with the decisions about the look of interior spaces, the specifying, coordinating, and overseeing of the plans, construction, and installation of interiors within buildings and homes became the responsibility of this new profession. The 20th century also introduced an entire new futuristic design aesthetic called Modernism that influenced the design of everything from clocks to furniture. Rooms like this may seem familiar. That's because we still rely, even now in 2021, on that aesthetic in our design palette, so to speak. One of the earliest recognized interior designers was Elsie de Wolfe in the mid-1920s. A wealthy socialite from New York, she made a mark among the society of the rich and famous by pulling together and coordinating the designs of unique interiors projects for exclusive homes and offices. Her success and credibility helped pave the way for today's interior design profession. Amazing men and women designers like Elsie de Wolfe, Ray and Charles Eames, Herman Miller, and George Nelson, among others, began creating interiors, furniture, and objects that were efficient, detailed, and beautiful in their own right. After the turbulence of World War II, the 1950s was a time of dramatic change in the world of art and design. The idea of modernism reflected a worldwide desire to move forwards into the future. During the Second World War, architects and designer Ray and Charles Eames began experimenting in the 1940s, forming thin sheets of wood veneer under heat and pressure. They put their energy and talent to work making splint stretchers and glider shells out of pressed formed wood. Adapting the technology to furniture making after the war, they succeeded in creating a new kind of chair, sculpting a seat and back to fit the contours of the human body. Here, we're seeing it. They designed a truly comfortable chair that's suitable for homes and businesses. It's sleek and elegant, wait, I'm over here. Sleek and elegant look became emblematic of a new design style known as mid-century modern. Among their many other design awards, Time magazine named it the best design of the 20th century. It's still an emblematic design and it's still very much in use. George Nelson was an American industrial designer, and while the lead designer for the Herman Miller Furniture Company, Nelson and his design studio designed 20th century modernist furniture and developed the revolutionary idea of the open office, shown here. And while working with the Herman Miller Furniture Company, many of his furniture designs have become a fundamental part of every office in America. He was also very famous for some of his beautiful objects. This is his clock, one of many clocks that he designed. And they're absolutely beautiful. Today, we recognize that there is a difference between an interior decorator and an interior designer. An interior decorator adds ornamentation and aesthetic changes within a space. This can be selecting and hanging art on walls, changing paint colors, placing furniture or rugs on floors, specifying crown molding or light fixtures on ceiling. The prime responsibility of a decorator is to enhance the appearance of space. Interior design, on the other hand, is more about configuring interior space to augment the use of it for personal or public needs, and involves organizing and managing a complex set of design decisions such as space planning, lighting type and color, circulation and exiting strategies. Furniture placement from the initial design phase through the final construction is part and parcel to what an interior designer will handle. Along with specifying furniture for space, an interior designer often must choose materials, including the different mini textiles needed for floors, furniture, walls, and drapery. Textiles add not only to the beauty of a space, but can perform important functions such as sound baffling with carpet, wall coverings, and furnishings, or mitigation of heat and cold and sun through window treatments. Space planning. Space planning includes exiting and circulation, floor surfaces and safety finishes, appliance and furniture arrangement from the initial idea phase through construction. This is probably one of the most important jobs in the initial phase of an interior design project, and it must take into consideration health, safety, and circulation standards and codes, as well as the complex function of the whole building. Whether it's a single room in a home or an institution or office building, space planning is the basis for the comfort and efficient use of the interior space. Lighting design can be the responsibility of a lighting specialist contractor, subcontractor, or a company, but it is the interior designer that must decide the color and type of lighting, the placement of the fixtures, and the appropriate lighting levels that a client needs to have a comfortable and useful space. Graceful and well-placed lighting is essential to creating the right mood and making the space as safe and functional as possible. To determine the best way of dealing with the problems presented in a project, a designer must always consider many important aspects of the overall design idea as possible, based on their skill and their professional experience. I call it the designer's superpower. For the aesthetic aspects of a design, the designer must ask themselves what they want to achieve with the design. Is it cozy? Is it modern? Is it elegant, fun? By defining the feelings the space should make in the occupant, it clarifies the goals for the chosen space to the client and designer. The emotional aspects of design affect the client as well as the end user by asking for critical decisions about color choices, materials, textures, spatial layout, and lighting, color, and levels. What feelings should the design evoke when it's finished? What materials, color, texture, or layout work to make those feelings happen once the project is completed and in use? Practical aspects are a serious part of the skill of critical thinking that gives the designer a clear-eyed view of the project and all of the project pieces, and allows a designer to have an objectivity in the problem-solving process. Sustainability. Sustainability issues, really important, are included at the start of any project and involve early decision-making about the acquisition and efficient transport of the project materials and the installations and even the vendors. It's an important consideration through to the end of the construction that may include planning for the safe and careful disposal of the construction refuse, as well as any toxic building materials that were used in the construction. Clear communication is essential, not only between the interior designer and the client, but also the various subcontractors, vendors, and specialists. There are a lot of players in a building project, even a small one. If a project isn't planned and expressed in some concrete way by notes, plans, illustration drawings, construction drawings, samples, images, the design will suffer and ultimately the project will suffer. It requires the skills to combine the pragmatic project requirements of building code rules, sustainability, accessibility, and construction types, to name a few, with the individual client's needs and taste in an aesthetically successful way. Because of the added professional responsibilities and liabilities involved, many states recommend an advanced level of education, practical experience combined with rigorous testing and through their licensing boards, such as the TBAE, which is the Texas Board of Architectural Examiners, which is actually the people in Texas who oversee licensing in the interior design industry. Although it's essential to have an understanding of the background and influences involved in making good design, ultimately, interior design is a profession requiring a practical and disciplined approach to problem solving. Beginning a new interior design project is always full of potential, with a sense of possibility, connecting to your client, defining a new set of problems to solve, and opportunity to create something interesting and new. As with any type of project, there are phases that keep the project organized and on target. Of course, designers may differ on the specifics of each phase of a project or what they call them, but in general, there are 5 that seem to be accepted across the board. Even though not every one of these phases may be necessary in a very small or uncomplicated project, the phases in the design process are programming, schematic design, concept development, construction drawings, this one here, and construction itself. Of course, there can be some back and forth between the phases as a project is developed. Programming phase. Any project starts out with an analysis and research phase to determine the particular demands presented in a project. This phase generally involves talking to the client about the project type, such as new building, or refurbishing an older building, or building a new building, or taking existing space, or making a complete remodel. The type of project often determines the scope, size, and approximate cost of a project and whether it is commercial or residential. In the next phase, called schematic design, a designer can begin development of the overall scope of the project by making sketches of the initial design ideas, creating diagrams to help determine things like the division of square footage, use zones within the space, suggested circulation patterns, or emergency exiting strategies. They often use diagrams like this one to help them analyze the ideas involved in the initial concept, and then use sketches to create an image that they can present to the client and help the client make decisions about how that space will ultimately be used. This is the phase where the ideas flow freely, and it gives the client and the designer room to experiment and to create. Concept development phase is where the decisions are made, where the project of the ideas are fully worked out and agreed upon by the designer and the client. The cost and the scope of the overall project should be determined during this phase and initial time frame agreed on with the contractor. This is the period that, this is the phase in which the contractor and subcontractors are often hired. This is the construction drawing set. Construction drawings can include not only construction drawings, but they can also include things like written specifications and notes, as well as contracts. It's the phase where the concept development is finalized and a set of documents and construction drawings consisting of plans, sections, elevations, and schedules are created to communicate the final project decisions to all the other groups and individuals who are involved in the building process. The construction phase. This is the final phase of the project development in which the contractor and the subcontractors physically build the ideas and concepts that will make the space functional and beautiful in the way that the client wants and the designer intended. When designing a project for a client, these are the parameters that define what the whole project consists of, from concept ideas to final construction of the built interior. As a creative person, it's important that the designer believe that the parameters are not limits. They are part of the intellectual structure that defines the design concept in order to build in the real world. A successful designer views them as challenges that, once mastered, will result in a unique and special space. Thank you.